Welcome to Hatman Strikes Back Daily Boxing News. Now, before we get to the main topic of today's stream, there are a few other stories that I want to cover first. And you guys know that the main topic is going to cause a lot of debate in the live chat, so I want to be able to respond to the things that people are saying. So let's get through some other news first, then we'll get onto this Jake Paul, Anthony Joshua situation. Let's just call it that. So shout out to everybody in the live chat. If you could all do me a favor and just stick a like on this stream It really helps with visibility. So thanks in advance. I like to keep the concurrent viewers to likes ratio at least 50%. So you can all just take a split second to like this stream. It costs you nothing. So yeah, thanks in advance. All right, let's get on to the first story here. So this guy is Samson Lukowicz. I think that's how you pronounce his surname. I always struggle with it, but that's how I'm going to pronounce it. Samson Lukowicz is the manager of David Benavidez. And he did a couple of interviews a few days ago. This is one of them on Fight Hub TV. And he's basically saying that he doesn't see the David Benavidez-Dmitry Bivol fight happening because, as I suspected when Turki Al-Sheikh came out and said that he doesn't want to see Bivol Benavidez anymore, there's been an impasse in negotiations behind the scenes. And it's centered around the fact that Benavidez, according to Lukowicz, is unwilling to fight in Saudi Arabia. And Bivol is basically under Turki Al-Sheikh's instructions, it would seem, at this point, or at least influence, because Turki Al-Sheikh put that interview out where he said that Bivol knows who's been good to him in the past and so on and so forth. It was almost like a veiled threat, as if to say, yeah, you can go and fight Benavidez on PBC in the United States, but don't come back looking for a payday with Riyadh Season again afterwards. That was what I got from it anyway. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. So you got Turkey on one side, you got Al Haymon PBC on the other side. Both sides want it their way, and therefore it looks like the fight is not going to happen. Now, Benavidez's people are willing to let the situation go to a purse bid because there is an allotted amount of time for the two sides to negotiate. If they can't come to a agreement, then it goes to a purse bid. This is how mandatory situations go. But in this particular instance, David Benavidez is actually the WBC interim champion. So it's like a slightly enhanced version of a mandatory. And what often happens with these interim champions is if the full champion gets stripped of the belt, rather than having to fight somebody for the vacant belt, the interim champion just gets elevated to full champion without having to do that. That could be the case here with David Benavidez. If Dmitry Bivol fails to go ahead with a purse bid and basically pulls out of the fight, refuses to go through with it, then Benavidez could be elevated to full WBC champion in relatively short order. We've heard that there's this potential issue between the WBC and Turki Al-Sheikh over Al-Sheikh and Dana White's new boxing league, although there is some type of WBC tournament which is taking place in conjunction with the Saudis. Again, Turki Al-Sheikh being involved in that as far as I'm aware. So it's kind of contradictory, isn't it? On one hand, they seem to be working together and you would think things are all good. But on the other hand, the WBC was sending out emails, apparently, telling several of their champions to publicly endorse the WBC and talk on their social media about how much they love being WBC champions. Okay, so I don't know what's going on there, but in any event, Samson Lukowicz in this interview said that the loyalty for Benavidez here is to the WBC. And it was interesting, he said, the loyalty right now is to the WBC. Well, if it's loyalty right now, then it's not really loyalty, is it? It's convenience, and that's okay. You wouldn't expect anyone in their right mind to be loyal to an organization like the WBC. They are a law unto themselves, and they do what's best for themselves pretty much at all times. So, yeah, this is a disappointing situation as far as I'm concerned, because I would much rather see David Benavidez versus Dmitry Bivol rather than Bivol Beterbiev 3 next. I've got no problem with Bivol Beterbiev 3. I just don't want to see it in the next fight for Dmitry Bivol. I'd rather see him fight David Benavidez first. I think it would be very competitive. Yes, I would give the edge to Bivol, but I would not count David Benavidez out. by any stretch of the imagination. I think that outside of Beterbiev, Benavidez represents the most difficult challenge for Dmitry Bivol personally. So yeah, to see his manager come out and say this, like, nah, no chance the fight's happening. We're going to basically wait it out and, for the WBC to strip David Benavidez, wait for the WBC to strip, not David Benavidez, wait for the WBC to strip Dmitry Bivol and then get elevated to full champion. And he's very bullish as well about the purse bid, because the interviewer asked him, if it went to a purse bid, would you be willing to fight in Saudi if the Saudis won the purse bid? And Samson basically shot down the question immediately. He said, why are you assuming that the Saudis will win the purse bid? What, you don't think that PBC have got money? Well, of course, PBC can, in some instances, stump up money. The question is, can they stump up the amount of money that the Saudis potentially could? And that's rhetorical. That's rhetorical, obviously, because they can't. However, Turki Al-Sheikh said that he's not going to bid on this fight. He's not interested in engaging in a purse bid. It's either his way or no way. Another interesting thing that was said in this interview is that the Saudis offered Benavidez a fight for a lot of money against somebody else, not Dmitry Bivol. Okay, so obviously they would like it to be Benavidez Bivol, but failing that, they were willing to offer Benavidez something else. And it would seem, the best guess of a lot of people, including myself, is that it was Callum Smith. And he was asked directly about Callum Smith in this interview, Samson was, and he said that's a fight that they may entertain at some stage, but there are lots of fights out there for David Benavidez. So yeah, disappointing situation from my perspective. But what say you? Is this a fight that you care about? Do you not care about? Let me know in the comment section below. And of course, when Turki Al-Sheikh came into boxing, whenever it was, 12, 18 months ago, he was supposed to put an end to all of this silly boxing politics that has prevented so many big fights happening over the years. And credit where it's due, Turki Al-Sheikh has certainly been able to make a lot of fights that otherwise wouldn't have been made. But now it's like he's falling into the same mindset of the promoters whose heads he was supposed to bang together. Like, the Eddie Hearns and Frank Warrens of the world and Bob Arum in years gone by. He's fallen into the same mindset that they were in, and particularly PBC, by saying, look, it's either my way or the highway. Either we do it on my terms, a particular fight, or the fight doesn't happen at all. And this is how boxing promoters have been behaving for years. So it's disappointing to see Turkey becoming part of the problem now. Anyway, moving on from this story, Moses Itauma will no longer be fighting on the Joe Joyce-Filip Hrgovic card, because he was supposed to fight on there. They were looking for an opponent for him, but apparently they've been unable to secure one. And so instead, Itauma will fight on May 24th in Scotland. It says here, the 20-year-old appeared to be heading for an undercard slot on Queensberry Promotions' Heavy Impact event, headlined by Joe Joyce against Filip Hrgovic in Manchester on April 5. The ring understands that the 21-0 Albanian Nelson Heisa was in the running to face Itauma at the Co-op Live Arena that night, but there has now been a change of plans. Instead, Itauma, who is 11-0 9 KOs and considered perhaps the hottest prospect in world boxing, will head north to Scotland to box at the SSE Hydro in Glasgow. At the top of the bill, Josh Taylor returns to the ring for the first time in a year following his defeat to Jack Catterall when he faces former British and Commonwealth champion Echo Esserman. Now Queensberry are finalising an opponent for Itauma, although it is unlikely that Heisa will get the nod. Now, before I talk about Itauma, Josh Taylor versus Echo Esserman's quite an interesting fight. Esserman's been in some barn burners over the past year or so, 18 months. But yeah, Moses Itauma, the story here for him is that if his next fight is going to be on May 24th, then that means he will not break Mike Tyson's record. So the Mike Tyson diehards, the Mike Tyson fanboys can breathe a sigh of relief, because it would have been horrifying to them for Tyson's record to be broken. I've said that I wanted to see Itauma break Mike Tyson's record. It was obviously always going to be difficult because Mike Tyson was in a unique position when he turned pro, in that the boxing landscape, certainly the heavyweight landscape, allowed for him to fight a ridiculous number of times in his first 2 years. He turned pro at 18 and he was, well over 20 fights, 25, 26 fights, whatever it was, by the time he challenged Trevor Berbick just 2 years later. Unfortunately for Moses Itauma, in the current boxing landscape, fighting that frequently, at least in televised bouts, is simply not possible. He signed a promotional contract with Frank Warren when he turned over, and therefore he is beholden to Warren in the sense that he can only get out the number of times that Warren puts shows on. And as I say, he was going to be very hard-pressed to break Mike Tyson's record unless the belts got fragmented sooner than they have, because there's only one belt that's been broken off Usyk. And, that was always a possibility, but it hasn't turned out to actually happen. So, yeah, Itauma will not break Mike Tyson's record if his next bout is on May 24th. I think the deadline for breaking Mike Tyson's record would have been May 21st, there or thereabouts. But yeah, he's not going to break that. So again, Mike Tyson fanboys, breathe a sigh of relief. Tyson's record is safe again for now. Itauma, I think, had a decent chance if he could have got a shot at maybe a vacant belt against the right opponent. But it looks like it won't be happening for him. So yeah, that's Moses Itauma news. Moving on to something else here. Jarell Miller posted this on his social media. For those of you not familiar, he's facing off here with John Jones. Yes, the UFC heavyweight champion. And below, you can see Miller put, "Something big is brewing." Now, Jarell Miller, for those of you who are maybe not aware, did have a career in kickboxing. And that career came to an end after failing a PED test, unsurprisingly. But he is trained in martial arts like kickboxing, and also, as I understand it, although he doesn't have any fights in this particular discipline, he's also trained in MMA, grappling, wrestling, so on and so forth, not just the kickboxing. And obviously, he's been doing professional boxing for many, many years now. So, obviously, at first glance, people are going to say Jarell Miller would be destroyed in the octagon, and John Jones would be destroyed in a boxing ring against Jarell Miller. And I would have to concur with that. But you never know. Fighting is unpredictable, particularly when you get big guys in there. And I don't know, it'd be something different for Jarell Miller if this was to happen in the UFC. Now, the UFC have a weight limit, which I think is 265 pounds, which in the modern day is a very, very low weight limit for heavyweights. So I'm not sure why they've got such a low weight limit, but yeah, 265 pounds. Jarell Miller is never going to be able to make that. This guy, at best, might be able to get down to 280. He's never going to get down to 265. If he did, they definitely need VADA testing. Do you know what I mean? Because I just don't see it. So either there's nothing going on here and Miller's just posting for the sake of posting, or maybe they will partake, or perhaps they're discussing partaking in an exhibition match or some type of non-title bout where the weight limit will not be imposed. If that is the case, would you guys be interested in watching this bout? Personally, I would, just out of curiosity to see what Miller can do in the octagon. I certainly wouldn't be interested in seeing what Jon Jones can do in a boxing ring, because I don't think it will be much. It'll be far more interesting to me, at least, if this takes place under MMA rules. And who knows? It's a crazy world out there. UFC isn't doing as well as it was, let's say, 12 months ago or so. Boxing has taken the play away from UFC. Now, some people are wondering why Jarell Miller would be an opponent for Jon Jones in the octagon. Surely there would be more eyes on it if it was a boxing match. You know, that's what some people have said. Well, Jarell Miller, last I checked, is embroiled in a legal battle with his promoter, Dmitry Salita. I don't know the nature of his contract with Salita, but it's possible, I guess, that contract is only applicable to Jarell Miller partaking in boxing matches. If he fights Jon Jones in an MMA match, that might be outside the jurisdiction, if you will, of his contract with Salita. So maybe this is why Jarell Miller is exploring this particular option, because, yeah, there's definitely no love lost between he and Salita at this point. So let me know what you guys think about this one in the comment section below. Jarell Miller versus Jon Jones. You reckon there's any legs in this? Or do you reckon it was just a little joke face-off because they're maybe somewhat familiar with each other or whatever the case may be? And as I say, Jarell Miller has been hanging around with and training with MMA people for many, many years. So, yeah, give me your take on it. All right, let's move on to some AJ news now, right? So first of all, Eddie Hearn has addressed this, and there's been some articles online regarding the situation. It says Anthony Joshua will return to camp in 8 weeks due to injury. Now, remember, we were told that Anthony Joshua was injured following the Daniel Dubois fight, and that's the excuse that was given for not taking the immediate rematch. And by the way, injury or no injury, I think it's a wise move not to rematch Daniel Dubois, not just immediately, but at all, in my opinion, because he got absolutely decimated. I compared it to when Deontay Wilder got destroyed by Zhilei Zhang. Nobody was calling for a rematch of that fight. Deontay Wilder wasn't calling for a rematch of that fight, okay? And similarly, I don't think AJ should be going anywhere near Daniel Dubois ever again. But yeah, we were told that he was injured after the Dubois fight, and that was the excuse they gave for not rematching him. Well, now, during some type of training, he seems to have picked up another injury. It says here, Anthony Joshua will return to full camp in 8 weeks after a mysterious injury to the top half of his body ahead of a potential return to the ring before summer is out. Joshua's last appearance was his crushing 5th round knockout defeat to Daniel Dubois at Wembley Stadium in September, which left his record at 28-4, 25 wins by knockout. He had openly spoken of his desire to return in order to finally secure the long-awaited Battle of Britain against Tyson Fury, only for the Gypsy King to announce his retirement from boxing a few days later. As reported by The Ring earlier this month, Joshua's longtime promoter Eddie Hearn believes the two-time world heavyweight champion will only fight again if it's against the returning Fury or a shot at revenge against IBF King Daniel Dubois. But Hearn confirmed that 35-year-old AJ is currently unable to return to full training anyway because of an injury. Once that is cleared, however, he would be in a position to box in September. When asked to specify what Joshua's injury is, Hearn said, top half of his body, there you go. Nothing major, but it means that he's been returning to training and it's not quite ready to turn back to camp. He needs about another 8 weeks until he can punch properly. You're looking at what, April to May till he can start camp properly. So it leads us to the back end of the summer. Now, one of the things I've always found curious about Anthony Joshua is the fact that he does such ridiculously long camps. This guy does like 3-4 month camps. I mean, here we have a guy who aesthetically at least is always in shape. He's never out of shape. So why do you need to do 3-4 month camps? It seems like overkill. And when you do camps that long, you're obviously breaking your body down more. You're tiring yourself out, and you are obviously risking more injury. So I don't know if that's something AJ might want to look at. Not that he's got much long left in his career anyway. But yeah, I've always found it curious how he needs these crazy long camps. Because if he was to return to full training in April or May, June, July, August, September, and they're talking about back into summer, August or September, that's like a 4-month camp. Why would you need a 4-month camp? Very, very strange. Anyway, the question then is, who will Anthony Joshua fight when he returns in September? Again, Hearn has said in some interviews that it would only be Tyson Fury, if he comes out of his little quote-unquote retirement, or Daniel Dubois. And obviously, that might depend actually on how Dubois gets on in an Usyk rematch, whether he wins or loses. Presumably, AJ would want to go for a title shot over gaining revenge over Dubois just for the sake of gaining revenge. And if Usyk beats Dubois again, will we see AJ go for Usyk? Let me know what you guys think about that in the comments. So yeah, Fury, Dubois, potentially Usyk. But then there's the wild card. And that is the title, of course, of this stream. Jake Paul has called out Anthony Joshua. I've not yet seen the latest Simon Jordan Talksport podcast, but as you can see, they're addressing it. Is AJ really fighting Jake Paul? Jake Paul called AJ out publicly. He said, although AJ's his friend, AJ has got a glass jaw, can't take a punch, and he threatened to knock him out. Now, I already saw some people in the live chat saying that this is AJ's level now, the likes of Jake Paul, fringe world level. I certainly do not class Jake Paul as fringe world level. Certainly not a cruiserweight, and definitely not a heavyweight. Jake Paul is a social media influencer, a YouTuber who has got a little bit of boxing ability, but could this guy even win any type of major amateur title? I seriously doubt it. Okay? And, bear in mind, he lost to Tommy Fury a few fights back. That's the level Jake Paul's at. He might have improved a little bit since then, but I don't think it's been a complete overhaul of his boxing style and boxing ability. I think far too many people were firstly impressed by the fact he was able to beat Mike Tyson. And then there's this absurd notion out there that Mike Tyson threw the fight. No, he didn't throw the fight. Mike Tyson is damn near 60 years of age. And anyone who took the time to actually watch the behind the scenes shoulder programming for the Mike Tyson-Jake Paul fight would have seen that Tyson looked absolutely terrible in training. And he also looked terrible in the ring during the public workout that was streamed to Jake Paul's YouTube channel. Subsequently, it was taken down. I'm not sure why. But yeah, they streamed the public workout for not just that fight, but the card. And Tyson looked awful on the pads with his, I believe, a Brazilian coach. Absolutely terrible. He couldn't move his legs. The trainer literally had to go into the corner and stand still in order for Mike Tyson to be able to get his punches off on the pads. He looked terrible. And in between every combination, Tyson took like 10, 15, 20, 30 seconds to regain his energy before he could throw another combination. So anyone who'd been paying attention to that and the shoulder programming on Netflix ahead of the Tyson-Jake Paul fight would have known that Tyson was completely done. You see people on Instagram who upload these heavily edited videos of Mike Tyson. Some of them weren't even from the run-up to the Jake Paul fight. They were actually from the run-up to the Roy Jones fight. That's how disingenuous and clickbaity some of these people were. Okay, the Roy Jones fight was several years ago. And they took these clips when Tyson's throwing punches, and of course they removed the parts where Tyson isn't throwing punches when he's resting after every combination for 15, 20, 30 seconds. And because so many people out there are not very bright and they can't tell that it's been edited together to try and make Mike Tyson look good, they thought that Mike Tyson was still some type of beast. No, he's a 60-year-old man whose legs are completely gone, who, even since the Roy Jones fight, had been bunning weed, all right, and not living a healthy lifestyle. The guy's body was riddled with injuries. I mean, how people thought that Tyson threw the fight is just ridiculous. Of course he didn't throw the fight. The guy came out and he had about 10, 15 seconds of punching in him. And after that, he was just a sitting duck, basically. That's all it was. And there was a lot of casuals out there. Oh, Tyson held back on this. No, he didn't hold back. He couldn't pull the trigger. Mike Tyson knew that, through his experience, at a certain range, if he doesn't throw the punch in a split-second time window, then he's going to miss and he's going to get countered. Yeah? That's why Tyson was hesitating to throw shots, because he knew that his timing was off. Jake Paul was pulling away at the right moment. He was in there with a young, athletic fighter. Now, obviously, the Mike Tyson at the back end of his real career when he fought Kevin McBride, even that version of Mike Tyson would have blasted Jake Paul out in a round or two. But Father Time is undefeated, as Dwyer likes to say. Yes, there comes a point when even a great fighter like Mike Tyson could get beaten by a YouTuber. Okay? And that's what we saw. We saw that moment where Tyson had deteriorated to that extent. Yeah? There was no fixed fight or any nonsense like that. And again, casuals wondering why Mike Tyson was biting his glove. That's something that he used to do years ago. He was biting his glove in the Kevin McBride fight. He was biting his glove in the Lennox Lewis fight out of frustration. Teddy Atlas on his podcast spoke about how Mike Tyson, even in the amateurs, sometimes used to bite his glove. It's something he did out of frustration and also sometimes to alleviate anxiety. And he was very frustrated against Jake Paul because he couldn't get his punches off. He's an old man. All right? Anyway, I say all that to say that Jake Paul against Anthony Joshua would be an absolute farce. Jake Paul is not a world-level cruiserweight. He's definitely not a world-level heavyweight. He's not even a fringe world-level heavyweight. Anthony Joshua would play with Jake Paul. Even this diminished, washed-up, damaged version of Anthony Joshua that we have today. He would absolutely play with him. Now, you guys remember in the run-up to the Ngannou fight, there were so many people, not just MMA fans, but even boxing people that turned up in the comments of my pre-fight videos who were saying, oh, you've got this one wrong, Hatman. I'm telling you, Ngannou's going to do it. AJ's going to have trouble. And I was absolutely resolute all along. I said, this fight is a joke. Anthony Joshua will have no problem with Ngannou at all. It's going to be totally comfortable for him. The only reason that he had success against Tyson Fury is because Fury didn't train. And that's something I want to use it as an example, because there were a lot of people making out as though Martin Bakoli's loss to Joseph Parker was indicative of how Bakoli's a hype job and basically acting like that's the best version of Martin Bakoli. Folks, people have training camps for a reason. Yeah. If you could just rock up out of bed, roll off the couch, having not trained for 6 months and be at your best, then everyone would be doing that. It's totally ridiculous. Yeah? The amount that you're going to be better after a training camp than you would be rolling off the couch after 6 months of, eating food and not exercising. The difference in your ability is absolutely enormous. Okay, it's like you're a totally different person after a proper camp if you've not been living life the right way. If you're a guy who's a perpetual athlete, like an Alexander Usyk, for example, you'd probably fare a lot better. You still wouldn't be anywhere near your best without a camp, but you'd fare a lot better. But anyway, I say all that to say that Tyson Fury was totally out of shape against Ngannou, wasn't prepared physically or mentally, and that performance flattered Ngannou massively. I knew it at the time. I was looking at Ngannou in the Fury fight, and his guard was an MMA guard. It was so wide open, you could literally drive a truck through it. And I was like, Anthony Joshua is going to punch this guy to pieces. Look at his guard. He's just wide open for straight shots. Like, come on. And that's exactly what happened. And I'm even more adamant that Anthony Joshua, if a Jake Paul fight were to happen, would destroy Jake Paul. I mean, good God, man. This is a YouTuber who's not even a real heavyweight. Jake Paul couldn't even beat Francis Ngannou. I'm telling you. So the idea that he's going to beat Anthony Joshua is bizarre to me. Okay? Anthony Joshua will toy with the guy, beat him easily. Now, I saw somebody in the chat, and I'll get to the chat in just a moment. I saw somebody in the chat asking how tall Jake Paul is. Jake Paul is listed at 6'1". Anthony Joshua is 6'6". So AJ is a full 5 inches taller than Jake Paul. Longer reach, naturally heavier, vastly more experienced, amateur and pro. I think Jake Paul had, 1 or 2 amateur fights in a Misfits arena, right? I'm not sure it was called Misfits then, but you know what I mean, against other influencers. That's it. And he's had a bunch of pro fights against journeyman, old MMA guys, and other influencers. And of course, he lost to an influencer in Tommy Fury. So again, the idea that he would beat Anthony Joshua, that would be, to me, even as diminished as AJ is, the biggest upset I've ever seen in boxing. If Jake Paul were to beat Anthony Joshua, that would blow my mind. I don't see it at all. Okay, now, is Jake Paul even serious? Because in the past, he's called out the likes of Canelo, for example. Some people say he was just clout chasing, calling out Canelo. Is he clout chasing, calling out Anthony Joshua too? Or is he that deluded that he thinks he can legitimately win the fight? Now, the reason that this fight is, I think, unlikely, right? Very unlikely, but I guess possible, is because in an interview with Eddie Hearn, he said that he's spoken to AJ just hypothetically about whether he would fight Jake Paul, and AJ indicated that if they paid him enough money, he would. So will Netflix, because surely they're going to be the ones who stump up the money, and presumably it would be on Netflix, would they be willing to pay for that fight? Because the Mike Tyson-Jake Paul fight was a complete circus. A lot of casuals felt like they'd been duped. Would they be able to sell this one? Would the casuals be cautious this time and not buy into it, given what happened with the Jake Paul-Mike Tyson fight? I can tell you that, in my view, yes, it would be a circus, but not for the reasons that the casuals may think. They might think that Jake Paul's going to go in there and do to Anthony Joshua what he did to Mike Tyson, or worse. Maybe blast AJ out in a couple rounds. No, it's far more likely to be the other way around. Anthony Joshua blasting Jake Paul out in a couple of rounds, okay? Or toying with him for a few rounds and then taking him out whenever he wants to. It's not a competitive fight. It's a silly fight, but if they want to pay AJ that amount of money, I mean, he's washed up anyway. He's not going to beat any world-level heavyweights at this stage. So could we really blame him for fighting Jake Paul if he can't get a Tyson Fury fight, or he can't get a fight against maybe Wilder or one of his contemporaries, and he's not going to fight anybody else? Fighting a Jake Paul for a load of money on Netflix, I shrug my shoulders. You know, it's a farce, it's a joke, it's a circus. But when a fighter's career is over anyway, I can't really begrudge them. So, yeah, that's my take on this potential, apparently, Anthony Joshua-Jake Paul fight. I don't think it will happen, but if it were to happen, Anthony Joshua wins easily. I mean, it would be one of the easiest victories of his whole career. Jake Paul would literally be in survival mode from the time when the first jab lands. That's what it would be. If the unthinkable happened and Jake Paul won, as I said a few moments ago, that would, to me, be the biggest upset in boxing history. By far. Even though AJ's not a champion anymore and he's washed up, the gulf in ability, in size, in experience, etc., etc. You know, AJ's not a 60-year-old man like Mike Tyson. He's only about, 34, 35. I mean, he, even now, will be sparring people many, many levels above Jake Paul. Much bigger and better than Jake Paul. So, anyway, I'm going to get to your questions and comments now. Shout out to everybody in the chat. Let's just switch up the visuals here. All right, we've got a super chat from the Sweet Maths. He says, Kenny Noy versus Nicholas Van Hoogstraten. Who wins? In a straightener, I'd have to go with Kenny Noy. But on some street-ish, I'll probably go with Van Hoogstraten. Van Hoogstraten has friends in very high places and very low places, as does Kenny Noy. But Van Hoogstraten's got deeper pockets, and he's international. So if it's some street-ish, some gangster-ish, that type of war, I'm going with Van Hoogstraten. But in a straightener, I'll go with Kenny Noy. Shout out to Ben for the super chat. He says, Prime Hopkins versus LaMotta. Best of three, who wins? I think Hopkins wins every time. I think it's too clever for LaMotta. At least the version of Hopkins who, you know, beat the likes of Antonio Tarver, you know, later on in his career when he was really wily and difficult. Because early on in Hopkins' career, like when he fought Roy Jones, for example, he was more of a attacking pressure fighter. He was still tricky, but he liked to apply pressure and let his hands go. And that gave you opportunities to counter him. But later on in his career, obviously when he won the middleweight tournament and beat Trinidad and he went on that run and whatnot before it was stopped by Jermaine Taylor, yeah, even that version of Hopkins, I reckon, would have beaten LaMotta. So, yeah, I go LaMotta, I go Hopkins all three times. Shout out to Ben for the super chat. Super chat from Jay Silver. He says, is Jake Paul trying to become Stephen Hawking? Maybe he is. I don't know. Maybe he's clout chasing, or maybe he's just that delusional. I mean, I want to give you an example of how out of touch Jake Paul has been over the years with regards to the realities of boxing. So, for example, Jake Paul claimed that Dimitri Bivol was a nobody and he was basically food for Canelo Alvarez. He was saying that that was a joke fight, that Bivol had no chance, that he was some type of Euro bum. This is how ignorant Jake Paul is about boxing. And perhaps that ignorance has led him to become delusional to the extent that he thinks he can beat Anthony Joshua in the squared circle. Yeah. This guy's got a history of being incredibly ignorant with regards to boxing. Shout out to Matt for the super chat. He says, just tuned in to see Joshua versus Jake Paul. Honestly, I have no issue with the fight because it satisfies me with Jake Paul fighting competition. Also, I feel like AJ has done enough in his career. Yeah, I echo those sentiments with regards to, it's not so much that AJ's done enough in his career, it's just that AJ is finished, in my opinion. And so if he's finished and he can't get a Tyson Fury fight or a Wilder fight or a fight against any of his other contemporaries, well, we don't want to see him go in there against Dubois again because the first fight was not competitive, and we don't want to see him fight Usyk again because Usyk schooled him twice. I think he should retire. Therefore, fighting a YouTuber, an influencer, I don't have an issue with it. AJ's finished anyway. Do you know what I mean? He's not like he's a champion or something, so we have to hold him to a high standard now. No, he's a guy on his last legs. So I wouldn't have any issue with AJ taking the fight, but Jake Paul, in my view, would be biting off way more than he can chew. And yeah, you could definitely see that as a good thing in the sense of he's trying to challenge himself and now take on real fighters, not ex-MMA guys and other influencers and stuff like that. So I definitely take your point on board. But yeah, I just think Jake Paul, if he's serious about taking the fight, I think he's completely delusional. And he would get a rude awakening in there against an Anthony Joshua. I mean, everything about AJ would shock him. You know, the speed that AJ has for a guy that size, the power even of his jab, the ring IQ, the reach, everything compared to Jake Paul is just on a completely different level. So, yeah, let's see what transpires, whether Netflix will be willing to bankroll that fight. If they are, then we might actually see it. Matt, with another super chat, says, if Jake Paul beat Anthony Joshua, would that be the biggest upset in boxing history? Yes. In my opinion, 100%, it will be the biggest upset I've ever seen in my life. When you consider the levels of both guys. And as I said earlier on, it's not like AJ's a 60-year-old man like Mike Tyson. No, he's only in his mid-30s. He's been losing to top-level heavyweights. He destroyed Otto Wallin. Does anybody really think that Jake Paul could beat Otto Wallin? I'm telling you, he couldn't. He destroyed Francis Ngannou, an MMA fighter, but at least a top-level competitor in a combat sport. Jake Paul has never been top-level in any combat sport. I'm 100% certain that Francis Ngannou beats Jake Paul. AJ destroyed him in 2 rounds. Before that, he beat the likes of Robert Helenius. Robert Helenius, in my opinion, beats Jake Paul. He also beat Jermaine Franklin, who would definitely beat Jake Paul. I mean, come on. There's no way that Jake Paul beats Jermaine Franklin. No way on God's green earth could Jake Paul beat somebody even of that level. So AJ makes light work of the problem child, as he calls himself. The problem child is going to find that he has way too many problems in the ring if he goes ahead and fights Anthony Joshua. That'd be bizarre. Shout out to Mr. Luca for the super chat. He says, only way Paul wins is if AJ takes a dive. I agree. But I can't see AJ doing that, personally. I mean, it's a crazy world. Anything is possible, but I would think that highly unlikely. Shout out to Jay Silver for the super chat. He says, Ryan Garcia is a better fight for Jake. Yeah, probably. Probably, because at least he's got the size and the weight and all that over Ryan Garcia. Fighting a guy, a former heavyweight champion, who still has athleticism and power and the size and the experience. I mean, come on. Jake Paul will be a lamb to the slaughter, but maybe he's too ignorant to realize it. Boxing fan says, if Jake Paul lands, he could drop AJ, or could he drop AJ? Well, potentially, but you could say that about Robert Helenius. You could say that about, many AJ, Francis Ngannou. So many AJ opponents, if they'd landed clean, could have hurt him, but they didn't land clean because they weren't good enough. And Jake Paul, I'm telling you, is not good enough. Anthony Joshua would land clean way more often and much earlier than Jake Paul. He's the guy with the height and the reach. He knows all the boxing moves. I mean, he'd be in there with a total novice. Mr. Lucas says, you think Jake Paul can hit anywhere near as hard as someone like Dubois? Indeed, he certainly cannot hit anywhere near as hard as Dubois. Matt says, what do you think about Jake Paul versus Martin Bakole? Well, that's another total mismatch. JDM says Dave Allen would destroy Jake Paul. Yeah, he literally would. Jake Paul couldn't beat Dave Allen. But, you know, when it comes to casuals, it's amusing how they perceive things at times. Just looking at some other comments here. Somebody's saying Ngannou beat Fury. Well, in your opinion, but as I say, it was a totally out of shape Fury. As I said, after the Bakole Parker debacle, training camps for a reason. When you haven't trained, you're not going to be anywhere near as good when you're fat and out of shape and whatnot as you are after a proper training camp with proper sparring and proper preparation and proper focus. You're a different man altogether. Adam says, what's happening to Errol Spencer? You mean Errol Spence? I think he's finished. I think the combination of the car crash, drinking, and the beating he took from Bud Crawford have finished him off. Okay, there's somebody saying AJ will be paid off just like Tyson. Tyson wasn't paid off. Like, seriously. Please don't give me the casual thing. Oh, Tyson was paid off and he threw the... No, he didn't throw the fight. He was an old man, and unfortunately, people fell for heavily edited clips of his training footage. If you watched any unedited sequences of Mike Tyson training, you would have known what to expect. Okay? A dead man walking. If you'd seen Mike Tyson at the open workout, you would have realized that this guy's got no legs. And he takes 15, 20, 30-second breaks between combinations. Like, no, it was not a fixed fight. Tyson wasn't paid off, paid to lose. He was literally a 60-year-old man. All right? And that's it. But, you know, casuals fall for these things. They fall for these narratives. And the silly edited clips on social media. Shout out to Alex for the super chat. He says, can Jake Paul win by decision against Ngannou? I don't think so. I don't think so. Ngannou's much bigger. You know, like 3 inches taller, got a much longer reach, way more powerful. No, I don't think that Jake Paul would stand much chance against Ngannou, to be honest with you. I think Ngannou beats Jake Paul comfortably. I don't think that would be particularly competitive. Folks, Jake Paul lost to Tommy Fury. Have we forgotten that already? He lost to Tommy Fury. No, Ngannou beats Jake Paul. Jumper says Mike Tyson was in a wheelchair from sciatica for months, only 2 years before fighting Jake. Exactly. Right? The man's body was in complete bits. In bits. So how people expected him to come firing combinations at Jake, I mean, dear oh dear. People are so easily duped by a bit of editing. Mark Hatch says, yeah, the Tyson fanboys got a reality check. Tyson was stopped by a journeyman when he was 38 already. Indeed, he was stopped by Kevin McBride like 20 years ago. If you're getting stopped by Kevin McBride 20 years ago, and in the time since you've been ballooning up and down in weight, you've been bunning weed, you've been drinking, you got all sorts of physical ailment problems and what have you, and you're 60, you're not going to be as good as you were back. You're not even going to be close to as good as you were when you lost to Kevin McBride, a low-level journeyman. But this is the incredible thing about Mike Tyson, which I said following and indeed leading up to the Jake Paul fight, is that Mike Tyson, and I took this analogy from Larry Merchant, Mike Tyson was like the boxing equivalent of Godzilla, in the sense that no matter how many times Godzilla gets killed off in movies, people still want to tune in, buy their tickets and go to the cinema and watch Godzilla all over again when a new Godzilla movie comes out. No matter how many times they killed his character, people still want to go see Godzilla. They still believe in the big bad monster. And that's what Mike Tyson was like even during his real career. The guy took a load of losses, but every time they resurrected him, the public were like, oh, it's going to be different this time, though, because he's back with this trainer, and now he's taking it seriously, and he's going to do this to Lennox Lewis. It's like, people, the guy's been shot for years. but people could never get over the mystique that surrounded Mike Tyson during his prime. They could never get over it. It just lived in their heads rent-free, and still does to this day. And that's why there were people that fell for the idea that a 60-year-old Mike Tyson could come out firing fast combinations and all this carry on. Like, if you stand in front of Mike Tyson with pads, he might be able to muster up, a fast combination 2 or 3 times in a 3-minute round. I mean, there's a reason that the Jake Paul fight only had 2-minute rounds, and it wasn't to help Jake Paul, folks. It was to help Mike Tyson. You know what I mean? Because the organizers knew that this guy can't fight for 3 minutes. Shout out to Alex for the super chat. He says, Jake Paul versus Alex Pereira is a better fight. I agree. Jake Paul versus Alex Pereira is a better fight. Yeah, I agree with that. Max says, Hatman, do you watch F1? No, I don't watch F1. Trolls are bad. Shout out for the super chat. He says, Jake Paul versus Vladimir Klitschko. Well, Klitschko's what, 50 now? Is he 50? I think he might be 50, or is in his late 40s anyway. It really depends on, we need to see some of Klitschko first. Unlike Mike Tyson, he's not been, as far as I'm aware, sitting back bunning weed. He's always been an athlete, Vladimir Klitschko. He doesn't balloon up and down in weight. He doesn't abuse his body the way Mike Tyson did. So it's possible he'll be a lot better preserved than a 60-year-old Mike Tyson. And he's, a decade younger. So I'm not sure on that. I would probably still lean towards Klitschko, but you don't know what the years out the ring have done to him. And they can really do a lot to a fighter when he reaches those type of ages. Kylie says Mike has probably got the most deluded fans I've ever witnessed. I agree. Okay, they're saying he's 49 tomorrow. Vladimir Klitschko, that is. Matt says, who is the Tony Ferguson of boxing right now? Tony Ferguson? I'm lost. Who's Tony Ferguson? Shout out to Mr. Luca for the super chat. He says, AJ would never be able to show his face if he lost. Yeah. Oh my God. If AJ lost to Jake Paul, he better move to a different country and change his name. He better move to a different country, get plastic surgery, and change his whole identity. Matt says, okay, Tony Ferguson is a UFC fighter who is former champion who lost 7 fights in a row but didn't get cut. Can't say I'm familiar with him. Goozy says, Vlad is busy right now. Is he? What's he busy doing? Has he got some kind of issues in his business or personal life? Okay, Kyle says Tony Ferguson is a great fighter who is washed and keeps getting knocked out. Yeah, I guess Mike Tyson was something like that during his real career. They kept resurrecting him and just selling this idea that he's back to his old best of the 1980s, and they've got him with Richie Giacchetti now, and he's doing it. It's like, come on, folks. How long are we going to keep falling for this? John Joe says, what's up, Hatman? I'd watch Jeremy Kyle versus Philip Schofield, but otherwise I'm not really interested in the Jake Paul boxing. It's challenging enough to follow professional boxing. Jay Silver says KSI is a middleweight. Blue Tiger says if Klitschko came back, I'd only be interested in seeing him fight Shannon Briggs. That'd be funny. Triple R says Jake Paul being smart, waiting for Froch to get older while Froch continues to build his YouTube channel. I reckon he'd take the fight in a few years' time. Because Froch is cool for that fight, right? He's cool for the Jake Paul fight. I mean, that's a more realistic fight for Jake Paul than Anthony Joshua, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, Anthony Joshua was an active heavyweight who just fought for the heavyweight title in his last bout. Like, come on. Kayvon Green says this is a joke fight. Paul versus AJ. Paul might get seriously hurt. I agree. MT says, could you imagine Jake Paul wobbling AJ? Again, AJ, see, it wouldn't just be horrendously shameful for AJ to lose to Jake Paul. Even if he had issues with him, it would be unthinkable. Do you know what I mean? The guy's literally a YouTuber. He's probably the level of, you know, a novice amateur. Somebody who's maybe just thinking about trying to get into the ABAs. G-Man Boxer says, Joshua is apparently injured. I reckon he will face Fury later this year. Yeah, I covered this apparent injury to AJ earlier on in the stream. And I was saying that it's weird how AJ always has these ridiculously long camps. Like Eddie Hearn says AJ's going into camp and it's like 4 months before the fight. Why does he need such long camps? Alex says, Usyk said he wants a show fight. What if he ends up fighting Jake Paul? That'd be a shocker. That would be a real shocker. Cal says John Jones wants a 6-month camp. Yeah, there's something going on there, isn't it, with John Jones? He doesn't want to fight the English guy. What's the guy's name again? I forget his name. If you're asking for a 6-month camp, then you just don't want to fight. For some reason, maybe it's the money that UFC are willing or not willing to pay him. Aspinall, thank you, Tom Aspinall. Yeah, that must be a money issue, I would assume. Now, Pennant says, Hatman, do you think UFC will become extinct? No, I don't think it'll become extinct. Nathaniel says, Eddie's Golden Girl lost the other day. He's rattled. Yeah, this alleged affair with Sky Nicholson, right? And she lost. Shout out to Mike. He says, evening, Hatman and chat. Hope everyone is well. Goozy says that's a money issue. John Jones wants 20 to 30 million for that fight. Good luck with that. The idea that Dana White or whoever else oversees these things, fighters' purses at UFC, the idea that they would pay him 30 million. Yeah, good luck with that. JR says, boxing talk wrapped up. Let's talk pyramids and Palpatine. Sporkley says, I remember when Mark Hatch was convinced that AJ will destroy Usyk. Boxing fan says, do you think it's possible Eddie is being romantically involved with Sky Nicholson? Yeah, I guess it's possible. Do I outright believe it? I don't know whether it's true or not, but I'm starting to suspect that it is. And the reason I'm starting to suspect that it is because Eddie Hearn has never come out and categorically refuted it and what have you. And you would expect him to do that. He's a married man. If people were just making up a ridiculous rumor that had no truth to it at all about him being involved with one of his fighters, surely he would come out and say, this is ridiculous, categorically no. Just even if he was to put out a social media post. But to my knowledge, he's never done any of that. Which to me is a little odd. This rumor has been circulating widely online for as long as it has, and Eddie Hearn has never shot it down. Or maybe he's just rising above it, but I don't know. The longer it goes on without Eddie Hearn addressing it, the more I'm thinking there might be some truth to it. Shout out to Cave1 for the super chat. He says, Naoya Inoue versus Jake Paul, who wins? Jake Paul's got a much better chance in that fight because of his size, but I still reckon Inoue would beat him, probably on points. I don't reckon he'd get Jake Paul out of there. I think Jake Paul's a bit too big, but I still reckon Inoue would be able to outmaneuver him and outbox him. A boxing fan says, do you reckon someone will ask Eddie to his face? Perhaps. I mean, Oscar De La Hoya sent for Eddie. See, that right there was the opportunity, if it was not true, that Eddie Hearn should have taken to address the claim, the rumor, when Oscar De La Hoya flat out said, you're having an affair with one of your fighters, Sky Nicholson. I mean, Eddie Hearn could have even sought legal action against De La Hoya. De La Hoya's got plenty of money. He could have forced De La Hoya, if it wasn't true, to retract what he said and make an apology, right? He didn't do that. Again, this is a married man. Imagine you're a married man in a public eye and somebody comes out and says something like that about you. Imagine what your wife is thinking. If it's not true, surely you'd want to put a stop to it when someone like Oscar De La Hoya comes out and makes the accusation against you publicly. But to my knowledge, Eddie's done none of that. So it does make you wonder. But anyway, that's his personal life. I'm not particularly interested in his personal life, truth be told. Kylie says Clarissa Shields versus Jake Paul with 16-ounce gloves. Jake Paul beats Clarissa Shields. Clarissa Shields is perhaps even more deluded than Jake Paul is. Jake Paul probably knocked Clarissa Shields out in 3 or 4 rounds. Clarissa Shields has been basically enabled by all these male sparring partners who have been pulling their punches for years. I mean, if you ever see those clips of Clarissa Shields sparring men, it's so obvious that the men are pulling their punches. The only time that one didn't, he knocked her damn near out cold. Some random journeyman who decided to actually throw some proper punches and he laid Clarissa Shields out. She's so delusional, it's unreal, but there you go. She may be even worse than Jake Paul. Jake Paul would iron Clarissa Shields out. Dominic Avery says Eddie Hill's got no wedding ring on anymore. Is that right? I've not been looking for that. Is his marriage on the rocks now? It does seem like unbelievably sloppy behavior for Eddie Hearn to be having an affair with one of his own fighters. I mean, he travels all over the world and he's got access to women everywhere, right? Guy's rich and tall and he looks like a Ken doll. And somehow, you know, if the allegations are true, he's having an affair with one of his own fighters. That's bizarre. And just like Oscar De La Hoya said, he said, you know, you don't ish where you eat. That's like the dumbest thing ever. If you're going to step out, and De La Hoya has stepped out plenty of times, right? You're going to step out, you don't ish where you eat. What kind of move is that? Now, Connor says, remember when Shields said she would knock out Keith Thurman? Well, to be fair, she said she would beat Keith Thurman on points. She said she would beat him on points. Thurman would, again, annihilate Clarissa Shields. She's just... Yeah, oh dear. That's all I can say about her. Seth says, Hatman, Inspector Deck or Ghostface? That's a good question. Inspector Deck technically is a much better rapper than Ghostface. Flow and punchlines and metaphors and just rhyming skill. But Ghostface is more poetic in some ways than Inspector Deck, and he's got a much more passionate delivery and a more animated voice. For that reason, Ghostface is a more appealing artist to most people, including myself. Inspector Deck is like more technical and less passionate. You don't really feel his words as much as you feel Ghostface's words, if that makes sense. So they're kind of very different rappers, despite both being in the same crew. But from a technical perspective, Deck was incredible. I love his verses on Liquid Swords, particularly Jewel of the Iron Mike and also Cold World. I loved his verse on the Gangstar album, Moment of Truth, on the track called Above the Clouds. So Deck was that guy for years, especially with guest verses. He was a beast. Indeed, Connor Williams says it. Yeah, his Triumph verse was crazy. From a technical perspective, Deck might have been the best rapper in the Wu-Tang, but he didn't have the charisma or the voice of some of the others, like Method Man. Got a great voice and loads of charisma. Ghostface, loads of charisma. Do you know what I mean? Inspector Deck was basically a rapper's rapper. Al Booger says, kind of like Tupac and Biggie. For me, no. No, I don't see it that way at all. Because Biggie had loads of charisma. Tupac had charisma too, but Biggie had plenty of charisma. And he was a better technical rapper than Tupac. On top of that. Shola says, peace, Hatman. Who, in your opinion, had the best verse on Triumph? Maybe Deck? Gorguga says, I thought Deck was technically one of the most basic in the Wu. Predictable rhyme schemes, but effective. I totally disagree. I think he was technically perhaps the best of all. Because he would structure his sentences in such a way that everything could be heard clearly. There was plenty of like multisyllabic rhymes in there and all that. So on Cold World, Jewel of the Iron Mike, Inspector Deck comes in with, how's the lyrics go now? Something like thugs kill for drugs plus the young bucks bust, ducking handcuffs, throats get cut when dough rush. Out of town foes look shook but still pose. We move like real pros through the streets we stroll. Bullet holes lace the windows in 1-6 soul control the avenue, that's the dreams that soul. Building lobbies or graveyards for small time. Yeah, that was a beast. On Above the Clouds with Gangstar, he said, I leave scientists mentally scarred, triple extra large, wild like rock stars that smash guitars. Poison darts from the guards, bust holes in your mirage. Catch a charge, shake them down like the riot squad. Invade your zone, ruin like ancient Rome. I span the universe and return to earth to claim my throne. The maker, owner, plus soul controller. Ayatollah, rest in the sky, the clouds my sofa. Like, he was crazy. Crazy. It's just that he didn't have, as I say, the charisma for some of the others. But from a technical perspective, I think he might have been the best one. Method Man was a beast too. He had a very unique style, unique flow. Shout out to Ben for the super chat. He says, is there any fighter in history that you would pick to beat a prime Roy Jones? Yes, I don't think there's any such thing as an invincible fighter. And it also depends on the weight classes you're talking about. Prime Roy Jones, his best weight was really 168. He was too small for 175, really. He wasn't at his best in that weight class. And he was a bit too big for middleweight. So 168. He obviously beat James Toney in a prime James Toney, and Toney was a fantastic counterpuncher. Jones was just too athletic and fast for him and too powerful. Would he have fared less well against the southpaw like Michael Nunn in his prime, maybe? Jones is the obvious pick over everyone that's ever fought at 168. But even back then, he was vulnerable. punch resistance wise. We saw that in the Lou Duval fight. That was at 175 pounds. So if you put all the top super middleweights that have ever existed in fantasy matchups against Roy Jones, one of them probably would have chinned him, in my opinion. Who it would be, I don't even want to guess, but I reckon he would have been the victim of an upset if he'd fought like all the best super middleweights that existed at some point. Because I don't think there's any such thing as an invincible fighter. I think there's always someone who's going to have your number. And it might not be an obvious someone, you know? King says, who's the hardest puncher, Foreman, Shavers, or Wilder? The hardest puncher out of those three, or the hardest puncher of all time? The hardest puncher of all time is probably somebody we don't even know. In terms of out of those three, I'll probably say Foreman. And Nabil says, everyone who fought both says Shavers, though. Yeah, well, some who fought both said Shavers, but Foreman was not a popular figure back then. So when all those guys, oh, Shavers hit, like, for example, Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali kept saying that Shavers hit harder. But Muhammad Ali had a rivalry with Foreman after their first, after their only fight. And he was always going at Foreman in the media, and Foreman was going back at him. So I'm not particularly convinced by that, to be honest. And also, when you're in there with someone, if they don't catch you with their best shot, then you're not really in a position to say that they don't hit as hard as the next man. So to really be able to judge, you'd have to get someone that's been hit with Shavers' best shot and Foreman's best shot. So any of you who haven't seen George Foreman versus Jose Roman, or Roman, let me pronounce it the Spanish way. If you haven't seen that fight, I encourage you to go watch it. It's a 1-round fight. George Foreman hits this guy so hard. It's terrifying to see Foreman wind up with his shots and lay into this guy with such ferocity, because Jose Roman had spat in Foreman's face before the fight. So Foreman was mad. And he was full of adrenaline. And that might be the hardest Foreman has hit somebody. It was tremendous power. Tremendous power. Like, just the way that Foreman was cranking the shots, you could see the kinetic chain and the ferocity in the shot. He was like, wow. Jay Silver says Wilder had or has a powerful straight right. Foreman had more variety. Yeah, Foreman could punch with both hands and with all shots, right? He could punch hard with uppercuts, overarm shots, hooks, straight shots. Like Mike Tyson, right? Mike Tyson had power in everything. Whereas Deontay Wilder only had power in his straight right hand. That was it. Now, his straight right hand was an A-plus punch, a fantastic punch. Definitely one of the best straight right hands I've ever seen in any weight class. Gorguga says, would Foreman be considered a small heavyweight today? Yes. He was basically the same size as Usyk. Mr. Lucas says, Foreman swinging like Wilder there. Just watched it. Yeah, swinging, but terrifyingly so, you know? When George Foreman fought Muhammad Ali, Foreman was like, I think about 220 pounds for the Ali fight. He never weighed in his prime in the 1970s. He never weighed any more than, I think, 231 or 232 was the absolute highest he came in at. But most of the time he was in the low. In some fights he was actually in the below 220. But for quite a few fights he was like in the mid 220s, 224, 226. Shout out to Capitalized on Pain. He says, Hatman, what are your thoughts on, let's call it man juice retention before fights, just for the sake of the algorithm here. Does it work? And do you have your own experience with this when you used to box? No, it's not something I ever used to practice. And professional fighters will give you very different answers. It really depends on the individual. So, for example, David Haye swore blind that not having, intercourse, not ejaculating, hopefully that won't trigger the algorithm here. David Haye swore blind that basically abstaining, let me call it that, abstaining was essential to building your testosterone up before the fight and being an animal when you got in the ring. So that's something David Haye used to do. But Larry Holmes said the opposite. Larry Holmes said that getting busy with his wife helped him. It helped relax him and it made him better in the fight. And there was a sprinter, I forget which sprinter it was. I think it was an American sprinter. And he said something similar. He said the day before a race, he would make love to his wife multiple times and he found it helped him with his nerves and it helped him run faster and be better. So it really depends on the individual. Really depends on the individual. Because again, engaging in that type of activity does relax you. It does release certain brain chemicals that make you feel good and put you on a high. So some people are saying, well, if you don't nut for a few days, your testosterone goes up, but then you might not necessarily need extra testosterone to help you win the fight. It might be more beneficial if you get those chemicals released that make you happy and relaxed. Do you know what I mean? So it's really down to the individual. Cal says today's heavyweights couldn't cope with 15 rounds and the toughness is lacking in work rates. Well, the heavyweights today are much bigger for the most part. Other than Usyk, they're all much bigger than the heavyweights back then. So obviously, being bigger, they're not going to be throwing as many punches generally. As far as the toughness, well, the guys back in the 70s weren't getting hit by 250, 260 pound men. So, I don't know whether they were necessarily tougher or not. Maybe they were, but you do have to take into account the fact that, bigger men generally do more damage. Not just from the punches, but even in the clinches. It's tiring being clinched by a 260 pound man. Goyon says Usyk could comfortably do 15 rounds. I agree. G-Man says the guys back in the 70s used 8-ounce gloves, didn't they? Yeah. I mentioned that in the George Foreman career review I did. When Foreman fought Joe Frazier in Kingston, Jamaica, they were wearing 8-ounce horsehair gloves. That is brutal. Not only is it brutal to take punches in little 8-ounce horsehair gloves, it's brutal on their hands. I mean, how these guys weren't smashing their hands to pieces. It's crazy. George Foreman in particular, I suspect, had tremendous bone density. Now, the Truth Channel says, anyone remember the rumors that they may have had in the glove when they fought Foreman? Can't remember his name. Okay, I'm not sure who you're referring to there. Thomas Leonard says, how good was a 45-year-old Foreman? Could give you a comparison with a fighter today. Well, a 45-year-old Foreman wasn't actually that good. I mean, for a 45-year-old man, he was good. But compared to the top heavyweights around at that time, he wasn't that good. He was battered by Holyfield. He had a few moments in the fight, but for the most part, he was battered. He was battered and totally outboxed by Tommy Morrison. And he was getting battered by Michael Moorer, truth be told, for 9.5 rounds before he landed a punch from the gods. He was also battered by Alex Stewart. Badly battered in that fight. So a 45-year-old Foreman wasn't good compared to the top heavyweights around at the time, but obviously he was good for a man of that age. Especially when you consider the fact that he'd taken 10 years away from the sport. Moonshine says Mora took a dive, LOL. I hope you're being sarcastic. He definitely didn't take a dive. Mark Hatch says Foreman used to say his water was poisoned in Zaire. Yeah, Foreman was very bitter after that defeat, but later on, for example, in the Champions Forever documentary, he admitted that he was just making excuses and couldn't accept what had happened to him. Triple R says Foreman said he was terrified before the Frazier fight. Yep. Leo, I'm not sure if you've watched my George Foreman career review that I uploaded the other day, but I went through all of that in there. When he fought the 5 people in one night. It wasn't 4, it was 5. Foreman versus the 5. Nabil says, did better against Holyfield than Tyson did, though. That's a good point, actually. Well, yeah, he lasted the distance. He lasted the distance with Holyfield, whereas Mike Tyson didn't. Mike Tyson got stopped. But that is a good point. Foreman was incredibly tough. You know, that's something I didn't actually mention in the career review I did, is how good George Foreman's chin was. Yes, he got dropped several times in his career. Obviously got stopped by Muhammad Ali, but that was more from fatigue than being hurt. And he was dropped by Ron Lyle a couple of times, and also dropped by Jimmy Young again, more so from fatigue. But really and truly, George Foreman had a tremendous chin. I mean, his chin actually seemed to be even better when he was old. He had a tremendous chin. And obviously, great physical toughness and mental toughness. G-Man says, did you watch the Foreman movie, Hatman? No, I never saw it. Never watched it. Sporkley says, Foreman went life and death with Axel Schultz, probably lost, Yeah, many people felt that he did lose. Boxing fan says, why and when did Jose spit on Foreman? It was before the fight. Why? I'm not even sure why. But he did spit on him. Spat in his face. Maybe it was a Latino macho, Ricardo Mayorga type situation. I don't know. But he thought it would be a good idea to spit at George Foreman. Found out the hard way it was a very bad idea. Moonshine says, Foreman always came across as a classy, humble dude. That's a leader people follow. Funny enough, though, for many, many years, Larry Holmes, but this is Larry Holmes after all. Larry Holmes very rarely had a good word to say about anybody. But Larry Holmes used to constantly call George Foreman a fraud. This was during the late 80s, 90s. This was after Larry Holmes was no longer champion. But he was still boxing. And I remember in many interviews he kept saying, like, George Foreman's the biggest fraud I've ever seen. He's just such a fraud, this guy. Damn near every time he spoke about George Foreman, he was slagging him off, calling him a fraud, saying that his whole persona is fake and, this, that, and the other. Lucan says, why do you think Foreman was scared of Frazier but not Ali? Because Frazier had beaten Ali and Norton had beaten Ali, and Foreman wiped both those guys out in 2 rounds. So he figured Ali would be easier than the guys who beat him. Kylie says Foreman versus the Five was fun to watch. He was up on his toes, showboating at times. Yeah. And that was an example of how Foreman actually had fast feet. When he wanted to get up on his toes and move about, Foreman could, get across the canvas quick. He chose to fight flat-footed to obviously generate the power and whatnot. But when he wanted to move around, Foreman was fleet-footed. He could move around quickly. All right, as always, just going to refresh this tab. You know how it goes. Tab always crashes at least once when I do a live stream. So I'll hold tight. If I'm missing some comments here. Okay, there we go. Jimbo Jones says, Larry Holmes was a bitter old man and still is. I don't doubt that that's true. Holmes was always extremely bitter. And as I say, very rarely had a good word to say about anyone. Boxing fan says, can't find any footage of him doing that. Google it. Google it. You'll find reference to it in articles. Jose Roman spitting on George Foreman. It's a well-known thing. And in fact, when you watch the fight, if you listen to the commentary, they'll talk about it. If you watch the full event, they talk about the fact that Jose Roman spat on George Foreman. They talk about it on the commentary. Yeah, Foreman did cut the ring off well. And one of the examples of when he cut the ring off well was in the Ken Norton fight. So Ken Norton was moving around the ring, spinning off the ropes, and Foreman was able to cut him off and reach across as Norton was trying to spin out and catch him with a right hook, which began the sequence that led to the first knockdown. So yeah, he did cut the ring off well. Yeah, Ernie Shavers was a big puncher, but unlike George Foreman, he couldn't take a shot. Shavers was very vulnerable. So either he would knock you out or you'd knock him out. Whereas Foreman was very physically tough. And they're the worst kind of punchers to fight, right? The guy who's a hellacious puncher, who's also got a great chin. And Jimbo Jones makes a good point. He says, Foreman may be small by today's standards, but I think his physical strength would still carry. Usyk is a small heavyweight, but seemed very physically strong against Fury in the clinch. Indeed. I was really impressed by how strong Usyk was on the inside against Fury. Very, very impressed by that. A guy that much bigger than you, and you're able to like shrug him off and push him around. Very impressive. You know, for me, the most impressive heavyweight punchers I've seen in my lifetime, just in terms of how ferocious they were and the presence they had in the ring, it was George Foreman and Mike Tyson. George Foreman and Mike Tyson. They just had a tremendous presence in the ring, you know. Foreman's presence in the ring was probably even more formidable than Tyson's in terms of his physical strength, because Mike Tyson was a great puncher, tremendous hand speed, very creative combinations and whatnot, but he wasn't the physically strongest heavyweight around at any point, you know? He was strong, but he was never a guy that couldn't be pushed back. There was quite a few people that managed to push him back. Evander Holyfield, of course, pushed him. Even Peter McNeely, as short as that fight was, he was able to push Mike Tyson back quite easily. So Mike Tyson was strong, but due to the lack of size and, well, not just the lack of size, but partially that, he wasn't the physically strongest guy in a clinch. He could be manhandled by the stronger guys, you know? Whereas George Foreman never got manhandled. Like his presence in the ring was a force of nature, you know? Striker says Foreman's aura still made him look like a giant in the ring, even though he's small by today's standards. Yeah, I agree with that. All right, folks, I'm going to wrap this one up. Shout out to all you guys, as always, for joining me on this stream. And a special shout out to everyone who donated via Super Chat. Much appreciated. I've enjoyed the conversation. Hopefully you guys have as well. Be good, take care, and I'll catch you on the other side. I'm out.